Hi, I'm Emily Brecklaw and welcome to the Caffeinated Quilter on YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about how to cut out hexagons, diamonds, triangles, and any other 60-degree shapes from fabric using basic rotary cutting tools and acrylic templates. So if you are following along with the Fiesta Time Flowers quilt along, which is to make the quilt behind me, you are going to need your free pattern, which you can find in the description box below. And you're going to need your fat quarter bundle. The amounts are listed also in the pattern. So grab your fabrics, and you will also need some sort of templates. I'm going to be using these wonderful acrylic templates that were made just for this quilt along by the fantastic people at Quilt Exchange. And you'll also need your basic rotary cutting mat and ruler and all that good stuff. So let's get started. Cutting out the fabric is probably one of my favorite parts of making a quilt. I love seeing how all the patches start working together once you've got the different hexagons and diamonds cut out and you can start laying them out. So for today, I'm going to show you how to cut all the different pieces for your Fiesta Time Flowers quilt. I will be using fat quarters of Lucian's Mini Moo fabrics, but if you are working along with me and using scraps, you're going to want to follow this note and it will explain to you how many of the different shapes you need for each of the blocks. So I've got two diagrams here for your fat quarters. This one is going to give you two of the kind of star centers of the block. So you're going to want to use this for your kind of focus fabrics that you want to see the most of in the quilt, because these are going to show up best. This other layout diagram gives you one of the star centers, but then also two sets of the squares that will be cut into snowball blocks later on, and kind of the little pointed edges around the sides of your blocks. If you have a stripe fabric, I would recommend using it for this layout. It's easier to either make all your stripes align vertically or horizontally in your quilt than it is to make them all line up correctly in the diamonds. So we're going to start by doing this one here, your layout that's going to have the two hexagons on it. So you're going to take your first fat quarter and fold it in half where your selvage edge meets your cut edge. And make sure it's square along the bottom. You want it all nice and neat so that your strips come out straight. And the first thing I'm going to do is square up the edge of my fabric I'm going to be cutting from. So I'm going to take this top edge here and just, get rid of this little bitty edge that's not quite perfect yet. So I'm going to line up my ruler along the fold here to get a nice accurate edge, and you can see very clearly there how it's not straight along that line. We're just going to take off that little bitty edge. Okay, and now we're ready to start cutting our strips. I'm going to turn that fabric around. And one of the things I like to do anytime when I am cutting out hexagons and diamonds and shapes like that is I like to align my template on the ruler so that I know I'm cutting out my strip width exactly the size I need it to be. If you were cutting out a 3-inch hexagon, you would want your strips to be approximately 5 3/4 inches. That's a little bit big. As you can see, if I went all the way to that line, you can see I've got like between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch extra. So I'm actually going to move that ruler over just a tiny bit, so now my template is lining up exactly on that cut line that we just had. And then we'll move line that up a little bit perfectly. Move that template off. And then we're going to cut that strip. We'll move the rest of the fabric aside for just a minute while we're cutting out our hexagons. And when I'm doing this part, I like to use a rotating cutting mat. It just makes it a little bit easier. You can just turn things around without having to lift off your template and your fabric. But if you don't have one, you can just turn your fabric around. It's no big deal. At this point, if you were using handmade templates like I showed you in the last video, what you would want to do is set your template on here. And then taking a pencil that shows up, you're going to trace around all this, you're going to trace around 4 sides of the hexagon, because theoretically these top and bottom ones are going to be straight. Mine's a little bit off. So you would trace around here, and then move your template and take your ruler and cut out on your pencil lines. So I'm going to do it with the acrylics though, because it's faster, and it'll make the video go a little bit quicker. So I'm going to take my template, and I don't like the way that edge is looking quite as much, so I'm going to line it up with the bottom edge and make that kind of my perfect edge. And I do still have my strip folded according to the diagram, we only need 2 hexagons out of this strip, so I'm going to just leave it folded and cut once and get both my hexagons. So I've got them lined up the way I like it here. I'll put my hand on the template to keep it from moving. Make sure my fingers are out of the way. And cut 1, 2 sides. Set that fabric aside. You can do something else fun with it. And then I'm just going to clean up this edge here a little bit. It's tiny, but it's going to make it more accurate. And then do the last 2 cuts. And now you've got 2 hexagons ready to go to be 2 of your center blocks, and we need some matching fabric diamonds to go along with them. So we're going to cut those out next. And go back to our big piece of fabric. And as you can see here on our cutting diagrams, we need 1, 2, 3 strips of diamonds. Those are roughly 3 1/8 inch. Ask me how I know. I've made a couple of these. So I'm going to line that up, and then I'm going to double check on my diamond template just to make sure. And I like the way that's looking. It looks all nice and straight. So we're going to go ahead and cut out 3 3 1/8 inch strips. Here's 1. The more accurate you are in this step, the easier your quilt's going to be to put together later. So you really want to take the time to make sure that that sits exactly on the 3 1/8 inch. And my rotary cutter just slid on me, so I'm going to trim that up. I've got 2 strips, and I got to go back and square this up again because that sure angled funny. Okay, get that all straightened out again, and cut out the third 3 1/8 inch strip. Okay, now you got a little bit of fabric left over. You can use that for binding strips if you wanted to, make a scrappy binding. That just doesn't want to let go, does it? Okay, now if I was not doing this on camera, I would probably lay all 3 of these strips together and cut them all at the same time. But for now, I'm just going to do one at a time. You do want to unfold your strips here. If you leave them folded, you're not going to be able to get all 5 or 6 of the diamonds that you need, 5 of the diamonds that you need to for each strip. So I'm just going to open that out, and like I said, if you wanted to, you could lay the other 2 on top of it and line them all up and cut them one time, but we're just going to do one at a time. So I'm going to lay this diamond on here. Get it all nice and straight, because if it lines up perfectly with these top and bottom edges, all you got to do is make 2 cuts. So 1, 2, and we're good to go. Now if you're using the Quilt Exchange templates, you'll see that the diamond points are left long here, so what you can do if you want to make your life a little bit easier and have a little bit less fabric to deal with is you can take your triangle template from the same set where the points are cut off and just line that up here and trim those 2 extra little bitty triangles off. I like having the points all the way on here because it makes it easier, makes it a more accurate cut. You're not having that little jog at the end, but it does put in an extra step for getting rid of those. Okay, now we're just going to keep doing that until we have our 12 different diamonds, because we want to make sure we have 6 diamonds for every hexagon we cut for this quilt. And now we have our 12 diamonds. So we're going to go ahead and set those aside with their hexagons and start working on the next fat quarter. Okay, so now let's work on cutting out that second fat quarter style, or the second fat quarter blocks. For this one I'm going to use a tiny little stripe that kind of almost reads like a solid, but it's going to look cool in the finished quilt. Again, I've got my fat quarter folded in half, selvage to cut edge. And then the first thing I'm going to do is just square up this edge of fabric so we've got a nice straight edge to work with. I'm going to line it up with the edge there. Trim off this tiny bit. Okay. And the first thing we're going to do is similar to the way we started the other fat quarter. We're going to cut one strip 5 3/4 or a tiny bit below that to be able to get one hexagon out of this strip. And then we're going to cut some other shapes out of it too. So we want to unfold this one once we're done. That looks about right there. I'm going to double check it with my template. And that's about perfect. I'm going to cut this strip. Move the rest of my fabric aside for a second. And unfold this strip. And use my cutting mat to cut out one hexagon. So I've got my strip unfolded so I don't accidentally cut two. And I'm just going to cut that. Well, there we go. Spin it around. And set that hexagon aside. And if you look at your pattern piece, the next thing we're going to do is cut one diamond to make sure, and then 2 squares. So I'm just going to line up with this already cut edge from the hexagon. That's the same angle as you're going to need for your diamond. So I'm just going to line this up real neatly in here. Try not to waste too much fabric. See, I've got it lined up to the point. And then I'm just going to, oh, I kind of moved my ruler a little bit. Cut that there. Okay, spin that around and get that last little edge off. Now I've got the one diamond I need off of this strip. And then the last thing we need is 2 3.5-inch squares. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of refold my fabric here so I've got a straight edge. And then if you have the Quilt Exchange templates, you can just lay this out and do it that way. Also, if you don't have these and you just want to use your ruler, you can certainly do that too. It's going to work the same with these little squares. Okay. Scraps out of the way, and now we have the 2 squares off of that strip. So these will go in different blocks in the finished quilt. And then we'll go back to cutting strips. And this second strip needs to be a strip of diamonds, so remember that's 3 1/8 inches. I'm just going to take my ruler and cut that real quick. Line it up so it's nice and neat. Okay, and then for the last 2 strips on this fat quarter, you can see it's just 2 rows of squares. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut those 3.5-inch strips while I've got this laid out on my table neatly. And just line this guy up. 3.5 inches, straight on the bottom. Good to go. So I've got my diamond strip, which is a tiny bit narrower, and a square strip, and a square strip. the scrap aside, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut these squares real quick first, just because I've already got that ruler, and it'll make it a little bit easier. I'm going to layer these two strips together so I can cut them out at the same time. Squares are hard to mess up. They're a lot easier after you're dealing with cutting all the angles of hexagons. Okay, line that guy up. Oh, I should turn that around. Give us a nice square edge to start with. Take off that selvage. And then we're going to need to make five squares for each one. So we get 10 squares out of it, we just need to make 5 cuts. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. So that's how you got that, and then you've still got that one strip left to cut into diamonds, but I already showed y'all how to cut that kind of strip out when we were cutting the other fat quarter, so I'm not going to do that right now, but you would just line up your template and go along there. And remember to unfold that first also so that you can get all 5 of your diamonds, because if you leave these strips folded, you'll only get 4 diamonds out of the strip. So you just unfold that and get your diamonds cut out. So that is all that is to cutting out the fat quarters. And now I'd like to show you how to cut out some of your strips from the larger pieces of fabric so that you can make your setting units and cut out the rest of your white pieces. So the first thing we're going to do is, well, actually I don't even know how I need to show you on that. The first thing on your list here is polka dots, is what was used in my original quilt. I'm going to use a variety of white fat quarters for this one, just because I had a bunch that came in this bundle and I wanted to go ahead and use them. So you're going to cut your strips 3.5 inches and then cut your squares from there. You'll get 8 squares out of each strip. So that's just like what you're doing with the fat quarter, except you'll have your fabric folded twice if you're using yardage, and you can get your strips cut out pretty quickly that way. And so let's go on to the white next. So the white is going to be, you almost don't even see it in the finished quilt. It's going to be those little tiny triangles that are going to give us the pointed edges on these blocks. So let's go ahead and cut some of those out. Those are going to be 2-inch squares. And if you have the Quilt Exchange templates, there's not a template for that just because they're 2-inch squares. And it's pretty easy to cut them out on your own. So I've got my white fabric here. This is just plain a solid white. You could certainly use a color or a print if you wanted to, but I would make it a small print if you were going to do that, because these squares are going to come out little bitty, and only half of them is going to be in the finished quilt anyway, so you're not going to have a whole lot of room for a print to show. So if you want to do a white or another solid here, that's probably your best bet. So once again, we're going to square up the fabric. This time we're cutting through 4 layers instead of 2, because we got the full width of fabric instead of the fat quarters. So we're just going to line the ruler up here and kind of get rid of that messy edge. And you're going to be making a bunch of these little white squares. You need 240 total for the quilt. So, and these will be some that you'll be using in our video next week to make the snowball blocks. So I would definitely make time to get these cut out this week. If you want to skip on some of your fat quarters, you really only need the 9 that we're going to be using that have the squares cut. So if you wanted to wait on those other 5 and take a break, you certainly could do that. You won't be behind next week. I'm just going to cut my 2-inch squares. Move the rest of my fabric aside. And I'm just going to trim off that selvage edge. And once again, you can leave these all folded together to make it go faster. And you're just going to cut 2-inch squares. So these are pretty easy to line up my ruler on 4. Line up the ruler on 6. And keep going down your strips. The other nice thing about using a solid for these is you don't have to worry about what's right side up or upside down when you're making your snowball blocks. So it makes it a little bit easier. But like I said, if you weren't doing a white background on your quilt and wanted to use a different color or a pattern, you certainly could do that. And there we go. And you're just going to repeat that 7 more times to get all your fun little 2-inch squares. And again, next week we will be using these and the squares that you're cutting out of your fat quarters. So these are the 2 pieces you will absolutely need to have finished to stay caught up for next week. But since this is our only cutting video, I'm going to go ahead and show you one more thing. For some of your setting triangles, or your setting blocks, you're going to be cutting piece triangles. So I'm just going to show you how to do those real quick because they're a little bit different. So this is going to be my light gray background for my triangles. It doesn't really show up terribly well on the quilt in the black and white here, but these are these little triangles that are in between each, kind of in between your star blocks. So if you're using a different color background, you could make these lighter or darker or whatever color you wanted to. So again, we're just going to square it up, get this neat little edge trim, make the edge neater. I love the polar bears in this fabric. Just cute. Okay, and so when you're working with 3-inch shapes, your triangles are also going to be 3 1/8-inch strips, just like your diamonds. So we're going to line the ruler up on 3 1/8. Make sure we're square. Same old, same old. I'm going to use my triangle template and just make sure that that's exactly correct. And it is. So, the pattern says you're going to need 8 of these strips of diamonds. Of triangles. I'm just going to cut one right now to show you. Move our fabric aside. Our lovely little cutting mat. Okay, I'm going to leave my strip folded, just because that way you can cut out more than one at a time. You're going to line that up where the fabric lines up with that one side of the triangle, giving you less to cut. And you're just going to cut here. Move your fabric aside, but keep that lined up because you're going to need that cut edge in a minute. Okay, so that gives you 4 triangles. And then you're just going to flip your template over, essentially. Each time you cut, you're just going to rotate your triangle 180 degrees to go all the way across. So that's a little bit different. In the diamond, we just were able to keep it in the same place each time. And if you want to wait on doing these guys, we won't be actually using the setting units for 2 or 3 more weeks. So if you don't have time to get it all cut out this week, definitely you can wait on your grays. We won't be messing with them for a while. But if you want to get ahead for the holidays and have it all taken care of, that'd be cool too. Okay, so we got 4, 8, 12 little triangles already. These go together really fast. I'll line up my edges here. Actually, I might recut on that edge just to make sure it stays nice. I'm getting close to the edge anyway, so I'm actually going to leave a little bit of room here because I don't like the way that edge looks. I'm just going to retrim that. Okay, now you got whatever that is, 16 triangles off a strip. You're going to do that, how many more times is this? 8 more times to get your 142 triangles. And then pretty much the rest of this, let's look at check our sheet again. So your polka dots are just going to be your 3.5-inch squares, so those are easy peasy. We already showed you how to do the white and the light gray we just did with the triangles. And then your dark gray, these are going to be your blocks that are going to be on the sides of the quilt that kind of have the same shape as the stars, but they're a little bit more muted so that you can focus on the colors. So it's pretty easy too. You just got your 3 1/8-inch strips and you're going to be cutting triangles and half hexagons out of them. And diamonds and triangles. So same thing we've been doing. And 3.5-inch squares, so you're good to go. If you guys have any questions on the cutting, please feel free to email me, emily@thecaffeinatedquilter.com. I would be more than happy to help. You can also leave a comment below on YouTube, and I will be able to answer it that way, or you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. And like I said, for next week, what you're going to need to do, your big homework, is getting your white squares cut and your colored squares. So the more of those you have done, the faster you can chain piece them all together. And I will see you next week. Thanks for watching.